Michael from One Sky here with another astrology video. This one's going to take a look at one of the most controversial and absurdly misunderstood topics in the field of astrology, the constellation of Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. Is it the 13th sign? Is it cause for rearranging the zodiac? No, probably not. Not historically anyway, but recently, yeah. Because the sun, moon, and planets pass through its stars. And that's the crux of what defines a constellation as zodiacal. It's what would make a group of stars astrologically important. This is a complex situation that most people don't take the time to investigate the nuance of. So let's take a closer look. The issue of Ophiuchus and the Zodiac blew up around year 2011 when astronomers created hyperbole about the Zodiac. Now, that's right, astronomers created hyperbole about the Zodiac. If you caught that, good on you, but yeah, they were saying there were really 13 signs, and if you were born in the first half of December, you weren't a Sagittarius. Your sign had changed. That was the line they tried to sell everybody, and they made it sound like it was because of some new discovery. Very confusing, very unhelpful, and since then there's been a lot of division in the astrological ranks. There's been a little bit of infighting, and I don't like that personally. Not necessarily because I don't enjoy a good debate or a heated discussion, but because divided precedes conquered. Divided precedes conquered in a lot of cases, where unity and togetherness that's generated out of listening across the aisles, across the party lines, this is really what strengthens groups. So as an astrologer, I want my fellow astrologers to be educated, to be able to engage across disciplines in conversation, and I want them to be curious, genuinely interested in why would you do that? Why would you read Ophiuchus? It's a perfectly good question. And I've even talked to well, I don't want to name drop, but I've talked to great siderealists, Western siderealists who I really admire, who have just flat out said to me, like, I don't know why you read Ophiuchus. It's a very polarized issue. When NASA and Space.com came out with this information, people who were already ignorant about the relationship between astrology and astronomy and the history of astrology, they're already ignorant, were only becoming more confused. And I just want to take a moment and point out that with all due respect, Space.com and NASA are not astrologers. These people are not valid sources of information on astrology, and it's just that simple. Actually, on their websites, they diminish astrology as quote-unquote not a valid science, but out the other side of their mouth, they make pronouncements about astrology as if, as professional scientists, they thought that would be helpful. So it's confusing, it's misleading, and these kind of professional contradictions aside, let's just move on and take a look at Ophiuchus, because those guys weren't even the first. They weren't the first to propose it or to recognize it. How far back does Ophiuchus go? Well, Ptolemy did write about it in his Almagest. It was one of 88 constellations that were major, important, but nowhere in the ancient world was Ophiuchus used as a zodiac sign. Nowhere that I can find, nowhere in my studies have I seen the way that we true siderealists do it today. I've never seen that in the ancient world. Ophiuchus was originally proposed as part of a 14-sign zodiac with the constellation of Cetus, the whale being the 14th sign with Ophiuchus. And here you have Here you have the zodiac, the zodiacal band, Virgo, Libra. Ophiuchus lies between the head of Scorpio and the stars of Sagittarius, and shares longitudinal degrees with the tail of Scorpio. Actually, some of its stars share longitudinal degrees with almost all of Scorpio, but where it crosses the ecliptic here is near the tail. Just to show you Cetus, that's here below Aries and Pisces, large constellation. And you can see the moon down here. You can see Eris, dwarf planet Eris. So yeah, planets and the moon especially in its tilted orbit, they do enter the stars of Cetus. Everything moves through the stars of Ophiuchus because it crosses the ecliptic. And there are some other non-zodiacal constellations like Perseus, Auriga, Orion, which is below in the southern hemisphere, and you can see the club of Orion even extending up into the band of the zodiacal territory, the degrees through which the planets move. So, one good question I've heard is, well, why don't we consider Orion a constellation? And interestingly, in ancient Babylon, they did. So, incidentally, the Babylonians didn't use Cetus, they didn't use Ophiuchus, but they did use Auriga, Orion, and Perseus. They used an 18-sign, uneven zodiac that you can learn more about by going to a search engine and typing in Babylonian star catalogs. Ophiuchus here doesn't really seem to have been a zodiacal sign anywhere in the ancient world, which is pretty weird, and I can't tell you why it is, but these stars were pretty much only considered important within the context or the sidereal mythology, if you will, of Scorpio. I haven't found a culture, an ancient culture, that recognized Ophiuchus as a zodiacal constellation. If you know of any, please leave something down in the comments for me. I would really love to learn. But it's interesting because this old world view of just reading it as Scorpio is a little bit, it's a part of the recipe of how I've come to read Ophiuchus in charts as a practitioner. And astrologers and astrology people sometimes ask me why I bother with this New Age hype. Even great siderealists who I admire have said to me, I don't know why you would read Ophiuchus. Well, I've considered it from multiple angles, and I'd like to explain why. This is not the only way, the right way, the best way, or anything of the sort. There are multiple angles of approach, and more than one angle will yield meaningful and helpful results to an astrologer. This information is just meant to help you consider for yourself, to expand your own understanding and complement other interpretations, or lack of interpretations, of these powerful stars of Ophiuchus. So why did Scorpio take a nearly universal position as the placeholder for this star group? I don't claim to know. I'm a little mystified that these stars that planets obviously move through, that obviously aren't Scorpio, weren't used in the ancient world. And looking at it here, it's easy to see why. I can even show you in a program called Stellarium. This is a map of the sky with constellational art activated. And let's see, here's Venus, Saturn, the Sun. Here are the planets. We have a lot of planets in this region of space right now. So I want to get some information about their orbits. Now, these red lines that I just brought onto the screen are the arcs of the planetary orbits. And you can easily see that every one of those orbits is moving through the stars of Ophiuchus. In fact, most of them spend more time in Ophiuchus, in the territory of Ophiuchus, than they do in Scorpio proper. So it seems very strange. It seems very strange to me that Ophiuchus wasn't more widely recognized. And I think that it may have been. I think that serpent wisdom is a very feminine thing and a very mystical thing and often a very secret thing. And I wouldn't be surprised to learn that there were cultures and people and groups that did observe the stars of Ophiuchus and its importance astrologically. But I'm not going to talk about that because I don't know. Again, leave a comment. So why did Scorpio take an almost universal position as a placeholder for these stars? Your guess is actually as good as mine. Mythologically, Ophiuchus is meaningful, it's significant, it's vital to the part of the journey that we make around the Zodiac, the journey of individuation, the journey towards liberation, and personal freedom and empowerment. Ophiuchus is a major part of this story. So, I'm not going to talk about the mythology of Ophiuchus very much here because that subject has been covered in various places. And as it relates to inner alchemy and astrology, I recommend the videos of YouTuber Polarity Dancer on that subject. He has 3 videos. The myth of Ophiuchus, the chemetic roots of Ophiuchus, and the roots of Ophiuchus. And I wouldn't dream of improving upon or repeating anything he said here because that is already out there, already available. Brother, thank you for that good work. Please keep it up. Please check out that channel, like, subscribe. What I want to do is look a little more directly at the astrological significance of Ophiuchus and mention its mythology within the context of that. So first of all, I see people get excited and they want to think about Ophiuchus as a different entity altogether than Scorpio. Maybe that's because it is. It's a separate constellation. Maybe they like the number 13. Maybe they like the return to the actual skies with astrology, the way it was practiced across the entire ancient world. There's some good reasons to get excited about Ophiuchus, actually, but astrologically, I really don't feel that it can be truly meaningfully separated from Scorpio. Meaning that if you just read it on its own without the context of Scorpio, I think we lose information, and I think that information is vital. I personally take the knowledge of Scorpio that we have from the ancient world, and I hold it as a kind of master key to understanding the energies of Ophiuchus. To illustrate this, I want to quote another astrologer named Elena Sheldon on the subject of Scorpio. And Elena, I'm sorry if I got your name wrong. I really appreciate your work. Elena Sheldon writes, Scorpio is a sign of great power. Scorpio and Pluto endows people with powers of regeneration, transformation, and transmutation. At its best, Scorpio energy can allow one to transmute darkness into light, to courageously venture where others are too afraid, giving them the ability to heal themselves, others, and society. They are the ultimate magicians, shamans, and healers. They can sit with people at their most desperate moments and meet them in their darkness, reach out their hand and guide them on their journey back to the light. Scorpio is also the psychologist that doesn't flinch when confronted with stories of abuse, and the emergency worker that faces the devastation of death and destruction, but bravely ventures forward. This is because Scorpio allows one not to fear pain or death, both metaphorically and literally, but see them as necessary steps in our path to transformation, merely a stage in a cycle. Beautiful writing, Elena. I thank you for that. And right in that paragraph are some major buzzwords around Ophiuchus. You'll notice regeneration, transmutation, healing, healer, shaman, psychologist. And I think that this is really important because Scorpio is not really as heavily associated with this in every branch of astrology. These aren't qualities. These aren't qualities I really hear people talking about as much or as much of a kind of a priority of the energies of Scorpio Ophiuchus. I mean, that information's out there. It's certainly known that Pluto's regenerative and that there are healing qualities to this. Constellation Ophiuchus has been associated with healing and with serpents by Greeks, Moors, Arabic astrologers, and others influenced by those sets of mythologies. Ophiuchus is most frequently associated with the Greek mythical figure of Asclepius, and also associated, and these are said to be the same people, so these aren't two different people, but Imhotep, the ancient Egyptian pharaoh, if I'm not mistaken. Imhotep was known to be of the highest caliber of healing practitioner and medicine person. Asclepius was son of the god Apollo, and in the Greek mythology, these stars were a representation of Asclepius holding a serpent. So this son of Apollo was said to be able to bring people back from the dead with his healing powers. That's a bit remarkable. Asclepius learned how to do this after seeing a vision of a snake bringing healing herbs to him. And this happened when Glaucus, the son of King Minos of Crete, fell into a jar of honey and drowned. Asclepius saw a snake slithering toward his body and killed it. Then another snake came along and placed an herb on the first one, which miraculously brought the first snake back to life. Asclepius saw this and took the same herb and treated Glaucus with it. The king's son was miraculously resurrected. Asclepius was raised by Chiron, the wise centaur, associated with Centaurus constellation, who taught him the art of healing. And in one of the myths, Asclepius was given the blood of the Gorgon Medusa by the goddess Athene. The Gorgon's blood from the veins on the left side of her body was poison, but the blood from the veins on the right side of her body was said to be able to bring people back to life. Medusa is very close to the etymological root of medicine, our modern word. Snakes and healing have long been associated. And interestingly, Asclepius' staff was a staff with a single serpent wrapped around it, as seen in the logo of the World Health Organization. So let me pull that up. Yeah, the Asclepius staff here on the right is the symbol of medicine. And interestingly, the caduceus, the staff with two serpents intertwined around it and wings above them, is an ancient symbol of commerce and profit belonging to Mercury Hermes. So I find that a bit interesting. I find that to be a bit telling, a telling picture of the medical industry and their symbology. And right away we can see a really vivid Scorpio Ophiuchus connection around regeneration, around healing, around medicine, around death and rebirth. So perhaps as importantly, Scorpio and the 8th house is where in the skies and in the astrological chart we find the energies of radical transformation. And this is Pluto's sign, and it carries with it change, transmutation, transformation, and this turning of something from that thing into another thing. Sometimes another thing entirely. This is transmutation, the changing of states from one to another. So I hope you can see where I'm going with this. This fearsome scorpion itself is very, very closely related to the serpent bearer in their energies, in the importance of their mythologies, and in their effects astrologically. And I think this has a lot to do with why it was just sort of simplified to just be Scorpio. For those that had knowledge, they understood the importance of Ophiuchus to Scorpio. But it's easier to just deal with that as one thing for a couple reasons. So entering into Scorpio, which we can see mighty Mars here is doing now, you get the pinchers. You get the stars of Dashuba here and the pinchers of the Scorpio. And then moving into these degrees, we get the star Antares, the heart of the Scorpion. Big, passionate, powerful, strong star. It's an influence of strength. It's an influence of depth and passion. It's important that Ophiuchus stands on the tail of Scorpius. It's significant. These are the legs, and they hold down the tail of the scorpion. They subdue it, and they offer mastery of venom and the fearsome power of poison. The snake that's wrapped around Asclepius in the constellational artwork, the classic constellational artwork, is never attacking him. And sometimes it's depicted as very wrathful, very angry, but Asclepius has mastered this force. He is the wielder. He is the bearer of the serpent. And what this offers is transmutation of the poison of Scorpio, of Lasath and Shaula, and the stars of the tail of the scorpion. It offers a mythology around controlling that poison, around suppressing and stopping the effect of that poison, around mastering it, even transmuting it and turning it into medicine. And remember here that ancient peoples never practiced astrology. It's true. The 14th century saw the birth of the word astrology. It's a later word, it's a later concept, and the ancient Grecians called it, it's a very long word that I can't pronounce because I don't speak classic or ancient Greek, but it translated to divination by means of astronomy. Those are air quotes because that's an actual translation. That's an actual quote. That is a direct Greek to English translation. Divination by means of astronomy. And in that kind of divination, the positional relationship and the energetic interaction like this, like the fact that the leg of Ophiuchus and the foot of Ophiuchus stands on the tail of the scorpion, that is considered significant. This isn't like an artistic interpretation or a fanciful, Neptunian delusion here, but it was actually significant in a meaningful way that Ophiuchus was concerned, like Scorpio, with venom, with depth, with power, with visionary and healing regenerative, rejuvenative, restorative qualities. This isn't really a coincidence. This isn't arbitrary or random. Another good question would be, why acknowledge Ophiuchus if Scorpio's correspondences and mythologies explain everything perfectly? Well, for one, you don't have to. You really don't have to acknowledge Ophiuchus here. And I want to own that, and I want to tell you, I'm not trying to make a case for Ophiuchus. I have nothing invested in whether any other astrologer reads Ophiuchus, separates it from Scorpio, builds it into Scorpio, does something in between, just calling it Scorpio Ophiuchus, which is what I do actually. Yeah. And why acknowledge it if just Scorpio explains everything perfectly? Well, I think that astrology can function well whether you read it all as Scorpio Ophiuchus, or you separate them completely. And on the other hand, Scorpio is enriched and really deepened by the acknowledgement of Ophiuchus. So it becomes like building on Scorpio's mythology. You could say that Ophiuchus vindicates Scorpio, since Scorpio certainly gets its share of bad rap as a difficult placement. So Pluto here, just today, conjoined to Saturn, not going exact, January 12th, 2020. Pluto here, the ruler of Scorpio, is a notoriously difficult energy to integrate into your psyche as a conscious force. It's so deep, and it's so powerful, and it's so secretive, and it's so dark. And it's very paradoxical. Scorpio is both detached and obsessed. It is both Lord of regeneration and healing and a Lord of death. It's where we find higher transcendental wisdom and our soul's purpose. And it lends itself to organized crime, hard drugs, black magic, abuse, manipulation, secrecy. Are we there yet? Yeah. So, anyway, with such a radical spectrum between its higher and lower octaves, I am personally grateful for any clues, for any extra information that allow me to understand it and work with it more skillfully, that build on the story and the narrative that we have of these energies and their octaves. And interestingly, Pluto has come to be seen as a twin planet. Pluto has a moon. Pluto has a moon called Charon, and Pluto is about twice the size of Charon. But the center of gravity, the center of the axis of rotation of Charon and Pluto is somewhere in between the two. I should have drawn a graphic for this. It actually I don't have one. But the two sort of orbit each other. It's not like here's Pluto and Charon is just going round and round. No. Pluto Charon is a dual planet. They orbit each other. Maybe, and you know where I'm going with this, maybe Pluto Charon rules Ophiuchus Scorpio, and that twin nature of the higher and lower octaves, the twin nature of those signs, and the radical dichotomy between those octaves, the spectrum that represents, can be explained and thought of better in terms of Pluto Charon as a dual. Just an idea. Are there significant and meaningful differences between Scorpio and Ophiuchus? It's not as easy as thinking that Scorp is the lower harmonic and Ophiuchus is the higher. On one hand, I personally don't really separate them. And on the other, when a body is in the stars of the Scorpion, the main stellar influence seems to be one of power, intensity, commitment, dark and dangerous subject matter, and a deepening and penetration of whatever the planet reflects in our inner life. When a body is in Ophiuchus, when a planet or a traveler is in Ophiuchus, the main influence seems to be the dichotomy between the poison and the medicine, and the challenge to distill the deep emotional dive and penetrating ruthlessness of Scorpio into the potential to offer meaningful benefit to others that Ophiuchus represents. How do we turn this snappy, bitey little hellion of a creature into something that can save lives, something that can meaningfully benefit and build? This alchemy, this transformation, this inner journey, the inner alchemy of Scorpio is just this exactly. And so some people read Ophiuchus as fire, and some people read it as water. Now we're talking about elemental association. So Scorpio is fixed water, and people often ask me, well, now that you have Ophiuchus, what are your elemental associations for it? Some people think it's ruled by ether, that it's just this totally transcendental thing. And I suspect that's romanticizing it a little bit. I actually see it as a water sign. The people I read with Ophiuchus suns and moons are similar in temperament to Scorpio. They don't seem significantly different in a way that makes me think, oh, this is just a totally different element, or a different triune orientation to the cardinal fixed and mutable. I read it as fixed water. So as fixed water ruled by Pluto, I'm really talking about just one thing. These stars, Pluto ruling both of them, and some people read the rulership a little bit different. But I read it as Pluto's. That makes the most sense. Some people read Chiron. Chiron the Centaur is a small body orbiting between Saturn and Uranus, out towards Uranus. And it's one of the largest centaurs. Some say it's as large as Charlico, the ruler of centaurs, the biggest one. And frankly, that makes sense, except that Centaurus is already a constellation ruled by Chiron. And, as like I said, with all the dichotomy of Pluto Charon, the healing and the life and the death and the the difference in octaves that we mentioned before, this dichotomous energy. I see Scorpio Ophiuchus as being ruled by Pluto. You could say Pluto Charon, because some people are referring to it as Pluto Charon. They're observing that it is a dual planet. So you can separate them. You can separate Scorpio and Ophiuchus, and if you find it helpful to do that, do it. I do it when I find it helpful. I feel like classically Scorpio is about death and rebirth, total change. So it makes sense. It makes sense very naturally that early Scorp, when we begin the process, is going to have a different expression than later Scorpio Ophiuchus. It's kind of that simple. We can get meaningful information from distinguishing Ophiuchus, and astrology is always about getting information that is meaningfully helpful. So, most important to the idea of Ophiuchus isn't his legs. It's not his big scorpion stomping feet. It's actually the star Alpha Ophiuchus at his head. And this is a star way off the ecliptic here, called In Arabic, Ras al-Hag, and that means the head of the snake charmer. The earliest evidence for snake charming comes from ancient Egyptian sources. Charmers in ancient Egypt mainly acted as magicians and healers, and as literate and high-status people, part of their studies involved learning the various types of snakes, the gods to whom the snakes were sacred, and how to treat those who were bitten by these reptiles. The star Ras al-Hag is the mind or the head of this magician, healer, shaman archetype, who tames the poison and understands those creatures who carry it. It is when planets are on the degree of that star that there's a connection to this mind of medicine, the willingness to engage dangerously in order to benefit others and master oneself. So like Scorpio's intense commitment and strength, Ophiuchus is pretty hardcore in a similar way. I've seen charts where a planet on Ras al-Hag is so empowered to transform and master those lower angles, lower angels of that person's nature, that a placement in the degree of Ophiuchus Ras al-Hag is like having a loaded 8th house or heavy Scorpio. It's a key to change. It's a key to not being stuck. It's growth, it's transmutation. It's the hypnotic mastery of, which takes peace and calm and collected, reserved, a sort of hypnotically centered approach to something dangerous, something that is fearsome. There's a lot of self-mastery inherent in that. So, Ophiuchus mythology and understanding it within the context of the Zodiac, specifically as a stage of development between Scorpio and Sagittarius, containing the passage of the galactic center. Edit. So another helpful thing to understand Scorpio's mythology, another helpful context, is to look at it as the passage of development between Scorpio, the challenge, the dive, the depth, the intensity, and Sagittarius, the bright, the expansive, the proud and truthful and jovial, the generous, the good. How do we go? How do we go from Scorp to Sag in so few longitudinal degrees? Interestingly, too, this is the degree of the galactic center here in the constellation boundaries of Ophiuchus. And the galactic center, as you may remember from my video on that subject, is known by major star-watching cultures like the Maya to be associated with the underworld, with death and rebirth, very literally. And for more information on that, check out my video called The Galactic Center in Astrology. I talk in that video about how Sagittarius A star, the supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, is associated with death and rebirth and the transition into the realm of the dead and the emergence into life again. And that energy of the phoenix rising from its own ashes is very much the energy of Scorpio Ophiuchus. I think that if we look at this in terms of divination by means of astronomy, it almost seems as if right where death shows up in the zodiac very intensely, we have two choices. You have a high road and a low road. You can take the path of the scorpion and either wield death or embrace death, or you can take the path of the shaman healer and transcend it, cure it, treat it, master it. We can struggle and fight for our territory like an angry creature, or we can surrender the ego, allowing Kundalini energy, the visionary serpent power, to flow through us and inform us from higher planes of awareness. And this choice is always ours. Which way we want to lean, when faced with death. And truth be told, I'm not trying to be morbid here, but we're always faced with death. Like, this is life's primary basic function, is to move towards death. So just a little dose of Plutonic reality there. All right, gonna look at the downside and the upside of observing Ophiuchus. And then, just to close out, I'm gonna look at where Ophiuchus pops up in some different zodiacs, and then we'll wrap it up. I think that the downside to Ophiuchus is that it's a little confusing to integrate. There's no consensus about it. There's no consensus about its meaning, except that it's got to do with human mastery of serpent medicine. That seemed to be a really common archetype across cultures in the ancient world. There's a lot of hyperbole with no basis floating around out there, and that's another downside. And it's a polarizing topic. I find this to be a pretty major bummer. People have really very strong opinions about Ophiuchus. And I want to say, I think it's because it challenges people's ego narrative. I think it challenges their personal ego narrative that they've supported with tropical astrology. So by acknowledging Ophiuchus, some people are going to hear me as saying, you're wrong. You have you have a different sign. Or some similar challenge to their very sense of selfhood and personhood on a deep level. So tropicalists who have watched this far, I really appreciate your open-mindedness and consideration. The upside to Ophiuchus is that it offers a really dynamic and more comprehensive picture of one of the most difficult phases of development, which is that reflected by Scorpio and the 8th house. This is often around the taboo, around death, around change, around other people's resources, but most certainly around a lot of stuff: sex, death, everything that makes people uncomfortable. The 8th house is just like, give you the feels. And the more information that we have, that we can arm ourselves with, the better prepared we will be to face what can be a scorpionic onslaught at times in our life. So I think that's very important. It offers an expanded perspective on the late degrees of Constellation Scorpio, where the tail lies, where the galactic center sits. This is an ominous place. It opens the possibility of astrology's return to its ancient celestial origins. Now, this is an important point because the actual stars of the living sky and a meaningful connection to the real world, not just our models of it, but a meaningful connection to the actual world, that our actual inner world and the actual outer world are connected, intertwined, reflecting each other, and ultimately, in the words of Hermes Trismegistus, just one thing. Just one thing. This really brings together, for me, the possibility of a return to astronomical astrology. The whole conversation is raising awareness that some people are practicing astrology, going back to the ancient roots and using the actual skies again. After a Dark Ages and a late Roman Empire and a late Antiquity period in Greece of basic confusion and lack of education and just ignorance about almost everything. I mean, even Aristotle and Claudius Ptolemy and that whole cohort of Hipparchus, everybody, they thought the earth was unmoving and fixed in the center of the whole cosmos and that everything revolved around it. We have a chance here with the introduction of Ophiuchus into the conversation to step out of the darkness of that error and into the light of relating to the real world as sacred. And I think that that is a really important point, a really positive side to this, and considering it is really directly related with considering an astrological return to astrology. It signifies the emergence in the collective psyche of the feminine, the serpent, the Shakti, the Kundalini, the shaman healer, and I think the higher octaves of Scorpio in the eighth, the higher angels of that nature. And all of this really is worth reading the comment section for, and seeing all of the confusion and ignorance around Ophiuchus, wading through all that, dealing with a controversial or hyperbole riddled subject is certainly that's just an easy payoff. I'll deal with that all day long in order to have this valuable information, and in order to present a case for a return to the actual skies as a true sidereal astrologer. So as promised, lastly, I just want to show you where Ophiuchus lies in some other zodiacs. If the stars are important, let's check out these stars. So here is Ophiuchus in the tropical zodiac. You'll see it here in late Sagittarius, actually, with the galactic center at about 28, some put it at 27, even 25, 24 degrees of Sag. Your mileage may vary. That looks like about 27 to me. The other zodiac that I want to illustrate is the Western, this is a Fagan-Bradley, Western Sidereal Zodiac. And this is really similar to the Lahiri, Ayanamsas, or any of the Vedic systems. They'll use 12 even signs like this, and instead of being completely misaligned to the stars, the Vedic zodiac uses a system that is more closely aligned. So you'll see Scorpio here in the sign of Scorpio, unlike the tropical Western. You'll see Capricorn here in the sign of Capricorn, and so on around pretty much the whole zodiacal band. Again, this is the Fagan-Bradley zodiac, so this is a Western sidereal tradition. All right, everybody, that about does it for this video on Ophiuchus. Thanks for listening this far in. I really appreciate you taking the time to educate yourself about the stars and about our sidereal mythology, our collective human heritage. I do this because I believe this is important, and I appreciate you if you've made it through this much of this video. My friends, I'll see you next time. Until then, I wish you very well, as always. Thank you for watching.